if something happened, at least you guys can rewatch later on in the future. Okay, so welcome everybody. Can you hear me well? Can you hear my son in the background or no? Like, no? Okay, good. Because he's like crying a little bit, but if it's good for you, it's all good. Okay, perfect. So let me start sharing my screen. Where's the sharing? Sharing is so complex sometimes to me. Okay, cool. I hope everybody can see my screen now. And let me just rearrange here my windows. By the way, I always complain about Zoom because I really hate the way Zoom organize stuff, okay? So we see another extra person join. So welcome everybody for this small, like a talk and workshop, right? Like I will try to show a couple of things that are already set up, of course, because if I have to set up everything live, it's gonna take much more time. But of course, I will show a couple of things that we can start doing. And one thing that I wanna talk about, like from now, like I think Figma is changing, right? And I think the way that we do prototypes, that is like a pretty much like a whiting, right? Like you use links all the time, right? Like it's pretty easy. We can like learn in 5 minutes. But I think a lot of things will start changing through the years, I think, okay? And it's gonna be important for everybody as a designer to start understanding the logic behind the new concept that Figma is launching. They launched it pretty much like 2 months ago, right? During the Config event in San Francisco. So let's start, okay? So this is me. I have to introduce myself always, right? Because I have to do my joke, okay, Anais? I don't know if Anais is gonna allow me to do that, but I'm a parent, but I don't know, like the kid that is crying right now outside of my office, I'm not sure if it's my son because I never did my DNA test, okay? So my wife never allowed me to do the DNA test, so I'm not sure if it's my kid, okay? But anyways, I put my name is on the document. So anyways, I have to pay for the education, food, clothes, all this stuff. It's on my bill every month now, okay? But I love this kid, okay? It's the way that it is now. I try to pass my knowledge a little bit, right? From my 64 years old, like working in my life, I'm trying to share with you. Okay, I'm super old. So I always try to share a little bit of my journey as a designer. So I designed it from the early Photoshop. I use everything that you can imagine. I use it, okay? I use it like a Macromedia products before Adobe acquired it. So I use freehand. I use like a Fireworks, I use Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever you name, I tested. So since we started using UI tools like Sketch, I use all of them, right? XD, everything that you can name in between, even like the other ones that they diet, I try all of them. So I think Figma now is like the tool that is gonna like remain from this like a war. Also, I write a newsletter. By the way, I'm sorry if you read my newsletter because I couldn't like send a newsletter through the past 3 weeks, I think, because I was super busy. Okay, but I have a lot of content to share. So if you wanna like subscribe, by the end I will I can share my link with for the newsletter. I know that Figma people, they don't like me too much because sometimes I always complain about what Figma, it doesn't work. So like probably they read my newsletter and they discard. Uh, um, so I try to create content for you guys as much as I can. And of course, I'm a designer by the end, right? Like this is our job, right? So we're gonna talk about different things, okay? A little bit of design tokens, the concept of design tokens, plugins that you can use, and some use case, okay? There's a lot of different use case that I will show. I was like grabbing a lot of things that we can do, but I would say I'm touching the surface of that because there's so many other ways that you can use, and it's almost building an architecture for your design project nowadays, I think. So it's gonna be important for you guys to start understanding that logic behind Figma, and maybe this could be the beginning of the end. And people are very scared, right? The beginning of the end of Figma, because Macromedia, they did that on Flash. I don't know if you guys remember that, but Flash, they start like having coding inside the design too, right? They have like action scripts, and after that, Adobe acquired them and they died, right? So almost the same story is happening here, right? Like they were acquired by Adobe. Now they are adding coding on the tool, and maybe they're gonna die. I don't know what's gonna happen, but let's learn, right, the concept. But I think it's worth to understand what's gonna happen. Okay, design tokens. How many of you guys heard about design tokens in your life? You can send a raise your hand, whatever. Let me see on the chat. A couple of them, a couple of people. Yes, okay. Michael, perfect. So no bad. Okay, no problem. We're gonna talk about that. But pretty much, as a simple definition, right? Is pretty much bringing the same concept from coding, right? Like we are borrowing that same concept, how developers, they're gonna organize components and how they're gonna create and make your design work, right? On coding. So they are going to pick some information, and they're gonna try to reuse that information over time, right? Because one of the things that you're gonna learn in coding in the future, if you try to learn code, is you never repeat yourself, right? If you're repeating yourself a lot, something is wrong with your code, right? So the idea is the same thing on design. So if you're repeating the same information, the same setting over and over again, something is wrong on your design, right? So we have to start shifting our mindset, how we set up things on Figma and our design projects, to make sure that everything that we are going to do, everything that we are going to set up is going to be way easier to manage to the future, okay? Of course, Figma is not perfect, okay? So that's why they don't like me, because I always say that. They're good, and I will tell you a couple of things that starting using that, you're going to understand why it's not perfect, okay? But they're going to improve. I hope so. So think about that, those small type of information that you have on your design when you're making a button, right? Maybe you have a radius corner, you have colors, you have typography, you have a lot of information, right? Maybe you have even a drop shadow, whatever it is that you're adding and using. Think about as a token, okay? And by the way, I could I think I never mentioned that to Kevin or Anais, right? But in San Francisco, I met one girl that she worked for Facebook, and she was from the team that created the concept of tokens for design, and she worked on Salesforce years ago, and it's they pretty much they start organizing those stuff. So it was pretty cool to talk with her. She's very influent. She took us inside all the happy hours that nobody could get in. So it was super cool. Okay, so there's this plugin that calls Tokens Studio. If you ever try that plugin, it's really amazing. It's beautiful. They really bring all the concept of design tokens into Figma. And I was following them for a long time. I tested, of course. I use it in small things just to see how everything will work out. But there's a big but on that. That's the thing. I personally, I don't like to save very sensitive information that is the tokens of your project in a plugin. I don't like that idea, because if the plugin die, or if the developers of this plugin you know, we don't like anymore to do that because, you know, we win the lottery, whatever, we don't need to work. So imagine your project is gonna die together with the plugin, right? Because you're not gonna get any support. So during the Figma conference, actually, I was thinking that they were like about to acquire that company, right? Because they acquired a lot of plugins, a lot of different companies. And I was thinking maybe they should just acquire this company and integrate into Figma, right? Because they have like much more advanced like features. But what happened? Figma, they just announced that they are going to do their design tokens, that is like the variables, right? Which is like a very, very interesting. I like the concept. There's like a lot of use case that I will show you today that you can use, but there's some limitations. So that's the problem. And pretty much like a Figma, if you follow the plugin, Figma is just copying like the same features. They are not even like being very creative. So that's why sometimes I see like they hire a lot of people, they pay really high salaries for those people, and those people are just copying, right? They're not even creative to create a new feature. They are just copying machines. But anyways, my recommendation is a great plugin, but I will never save sensitive information as tokens on a third-party plugin, okay? That's my recommendation. I talked with a lot of other designers from other companies, and also they like the plugin, but they are pretty much now towards the Figma variables because it's a native feature from Figma, okay? Okay, so the first thing that we can do, right, spacing. So a lot of time, right, you're like a designing and you have to have like a space, right, between objects. And usually what happens, if you don't set the nudge amount, right, I don't know if you're like familiar with that, but like the nudge amount from Figma by default is 10. So if you're using 8-point grid system or four points, every time that you're moving, it's gonna move 10 points, right? So it's not the best way to manage things. And you want to make like a sure that everybody's using the same like a spacing, right? Like whenever they are like giving a space between buttons, forms, avatar, whatever you're building, you want to follow the same structure. So those tokens here, spacing 01, 02, 03, they are from IBM front end, like a platform, right? So they use that as a structure. So they have like 2, 4, right? Like a really tiny spaces, 8, 12, 16, 24. So anytime that you need to make a decision, pretty much you already know the answer, right? Like and the large ones, you may ask me, but you know, the big ones, how exactly we're going to use that? You use especially in between sections, right? Or maybe like the section you need like to have like a bigger like a padding space. So you may need to use that to create those spaces, okay? And by the way, that's another thing that probably I can talk in the future, because a lot of time like I see designers saying borders, but borders are a different thing in coding, okay? So if you're talking with developers, don't say borders if you don't know what is border, padding, margin. They're different concepts, okay? So that's why sometimes you don't make friends, right? Like when you're like talking with developers, right? Because you say something, but they are like, but what you're saying is different, right? On my side, right? This happen a lot. I know, I've been there, okay? I just have a couple of developers friends nowadays, okay? But okay, so the first thing that you can do, let me show you here on my file here, because to access the variables, it's gonna be here on local variables, right? So the spacing, I already set up that. So you can create multiple collections. I created a couple of them today to show you. I like to have space none or 0, because sometimes if we are using that, just to make sure that this is like a 0 space, 2, 4, whatever, like I can just use that information, right? And one thing that is important, because sometimes like people just set up that, but there's a setting actually here there is an extra setting on inside the variables. So for example, if I want to use that information only for spacing, I should change here, right? Because if you see, there's like one information that is the gap, right? So usually I will remove that and just set up as a gap, just the space between the objects, okay? So this is important because otherwise people will use on everything. So you have to do one by one. This is like something that is horrible on Figma because there's no way to edit multiples like values. So it's pretty boring in the beginning to do all that, okay? But you're gonna set up that only one time when you are working, okay? Actually, there's another tool that you can, is a kind of a plugin that you can connect and you can set up, but it's almost coding because you have to use the brackets correctly. Otherwise, it's gonna break the information that you are bringing to Figma. But there's another way to set up this a little bit faster, I would say, okay? But if you're using that, make sure that you are just setting the gap in between that, okay? So another way to use is the corners radius, right? Because a lot of time we use that, right? Like you want to make a button, you want to make like an input field, you want to make a card, whatever you're designing, you need like to set up like a corner radius. So a lot of like the design systems out there, they already have some values they want to use, right? 4, 8, 12, or 16. They don't want to like allow you to use like I don't know, 15 or 21, right? Like, no, they don't want to allow you to change for values that is not going to work, right, in our system. So you want to keep the consistency. So here, I already set up the corners radius. So in my case, I use, I think Google, probably, like they have in a different way, right? So they have the token name as a small, medium, large, extra large, 2 extra large, and 3 times extra large, right? So they have 4, 8, 16, 12, 24, 32, and 64. So the only thing also that you have to use is like a setting up only for corners radius, right? Because if you don't set up that, all the properties that you have on your project that can use Figma variables, they will show up there. And you don't want to do that, right? Because otherwise it's going to be pretty confusing, right? Like now I can use like the same value that is like a 4, but it's for corner radius, but you're using for another thing, right? True spacing. So it's going to create inconsistency because, you know, you can hide that, right? I'm just using that because it's faster. But once you need to hand off to developers, they're going to see that. They're going to see it. But why you're using a token that is for corners radius to using for spacing, right? It's going to be very confusing. So that's another thing that I always say. Sometimes you have really good developers, but bad designers, right? A lot of bad designers. And I know a lot of them also. Some of those designers, they don't like me also because sometimes I have to say they are not very good. They don't like that, right? They don't take that information as a, you know, like a constructive feedback. You're not good because you're not setting up things correctly. That's why, you know, it's not because I don't like you. It's only because the way that you are working is not going to help the company and people around you and developers, right? So that's why. Okay, so this is another approach that you can use, right? Very simple. This is like a very simple information that we are going to use, and I will show you how to use that. So here, there's like some examples, right? Different cards that you can use, right? So I just brought a couple of cards here. So let's say I have this card just to follow, but if you start seeing like this is like the corners radius is 20, right? So that's the problem, that I don't want to use 20. So what I want to use is only because the spacing is already set up for everything. So that's the problem. But the corners radius, I can just set up for 4, 8, 16, or 24, right? So I want to make sure that it's going to look the same. So let's say that is 16, okay? So now you see that here, Figma will change that information. So it's going to be 16 only. So every time that I'm building a new card, I will make sure that is going to be 16, right? Because let's say that someone is crazy and say, we don't want to use 16, Juno. We want to use like a 18. Okay, whatever it is, you just change here, and this will change everything. Of course, you cannot see really well, so let me change for, let's say, 32, right? Let me change for 32. Now you see that this changes for 32. I think this one, I use the spacing, you see? So that's the problem. So let me see using the correct one. That is like a large and large, right? You see, that's the problem of allowing all the values to be enabled. So you can see that every time that someone requests a change, instead of going one by one, right? You just go in one place and change for everything. So let's say even the space, right? Or even the corners radius, like for input fields, right? You're not gonna do one by one. It's 10 is horrible, by the way, right? Because if you're using 10, is gonna be a problem. So maybe I will use the corners 8, right? So this will start creating some consistent. This is horrible, by the way. I will create only one component, of course, and this will reflect for everything. But it's important to understand that you can just come here and set up that. And if you need to change, you can just come here later on. I will change for 24. So it's going to change for everything, right? Let's say that people wants to make everything rounded. So it's going to be way easier to manage that, okay? So there's pretty much a table that helps you to control your design, right? So every time that you're like designing new components, you don't need to think too much about every like a detail, because all the details are already saved on the variables, right? So even the space, right? Probably this, yeah, they have like some auto layout here, but it's like a 24, it's like 25 right here. So instead of using like a 25 or thinking about all the time about that, you just go here, right, and use the spacing 7, right? So this should be spacing 7. So it's going to be 24, 24. So you don't need to think too much later, right, in the future to manage all that, because they are already all connected here for you, okay? And so on, right? You are going to start changing for all those small components one by one, the corners radio for the button, right? So all those information will be managed by the variables, okay? So that's why this is so powerful. Even if you are not even working a lot with variables, I always recommend you to start from spacing and corner radius, because those two things you're going to use for sure, right? If it's beautiful or ugly, your project, you have to use those things anyways, right? So it's a really good starting point for your project, okay? Any questions, anything that you want to say, you can post here. I will answer a lot of those questions by the end, but feel free to start posting your questions here, okay? If it's something important, I can just I have a question. Okay, there's some UI kit use 10 or 15. I wonder what you think about this. I think they don't understand what is 8-point grid system if they are using 10 or 15, right? So that's the problem. Because the idea behind of that is because you need to make everything a little bit more compatible for all the device screens out there in the market. So that's why we try to follow as much as we can. But if you're not following, the chances of not having a very sharp design on different devices is huge, right? Because you cannot control that, okay? So that's why. So this is really cool, by the way. I made this these connections and everything yesterday just to show you, because here there's two different things. One thing is about content and translation, and another thing is about even controlling components, right? So let's say that you have a component and you want to change the component, you can change using the variables, right? So this example is pretty cool because let me open here. They are on translation. Okay, so yesterday I was organizing this. There's a lot of things. So inside this design, if you check it out, I will show you again. We have the button that is add to cart. We have the counter items, the total, the flag. We have the name of the fruit, right? Raspberry. So we have different names in Portuguese, French, and Korean. You have like a different units, right? Thanks to US that always use like a different units, right? Like so like you have to use other type of like a units for temperature, for weight, and all that stuff, and also the price, right? So the only thing about pricing, by the way, I had this problem in another project, is because they use number as US, right? So you have like the dot for the cents, but other countries like in Brazil, we don't use the dot, right? We use like the comma, right? So that's the problem, because the way that they set up Figma is thinking about US market. So most of the time, I don't use the number. I have to use like a string, because it's not going to show the information that I want, right? It's going to show in a wrong way. So that's probably one thing they are going to change in the future. Okay, and you have currency, right? Like because different countries, they use like a different currencies, and you have different symbols, and you have like also the messages that you want to display to the user, right? So here you can just like set up that if you want to like change faster or add a description why we are using that. Is pretty like a useful later. So how this is going to work, right? I have all those variables here, and I have to connect that, right? I want to create different versions of like English, Portuguese, French, and Korean, right? Imagine like if you're working in a company and they need to make this for different like languages, right? Different countries like Miami, right? Like you have Spanish and English all the time, right? It's almost a country, right? Like living in Miami. So it's like you have to have a lot of things in two languages. So how you're gonna set up that, right? So I already organized it. So for example, the greetings here, hey, right? What we're gonna do, we're gonna use that symbol here that you can see that is applying the variables. So if you click here, right? So that's the problem. You have to scroll a lot nowadays. I think they need to improve a little bit the interface here, but I'm gonna link with the table, and I have the greeting hey, right? So I'm gonna just link that for now. So you see that this change it for the text to this string, right? And I can unlink if I want to change. I have the message here, so I will link that message also here. We have yummy stuff. The raspberry description here, the product name, right, is going to be right here, the name of the fruit. You have the price. So the price is going to be, let me see here, $5.99, because it's organic, okay? If it's not organic, it's cheaper. But this is organic raspberry. So here we have this one that is the currency, right? So the currency here, I will change. And we have like the weight, right? How much is weight? And this is like 12 ounces. Perfect. Here you may have a description. So the description is here of the product. And what else? Add to cart also. So if you want to add to cart, the CTA. Here is the items. The numbers are the same, so I don't need to change. But the items, because they're gonna have like a different like languages, and the total also I want to change because it's gonna be different. And also we have the country here, right? So that's a really cool thing, because I have this component, so I can change like the flag, right, for different countries. But instead of like doing this manually, I will link that also to variables. So on variables, if we go here, where is the country? Bum, 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 bum. Here, flag. Now everything is linked, right? And you're gonna say, okay, Juno, I don't see any difference. I know. right? Because we just link it for the first column. So that's the thing. By default, once you link the first time, they're going to use the first column all the time, okay? So let's say now I will duplicate that, right? 3 times here, right? I want to have all the languages. And the cool thing, you can set up individually in different levels, but by default, it's going to use the automatically selection, right? Even if I go here under, instead of changing individually, I can just set up as auto. So they're going to bring that information from the parent. So the parent, that is the frame, I want to set up that this parent is going to be Portuguese, right? So I will click here and everything is Portuguese now. And if I want to change this for French, it's going to be French, right? And if I want to change this for Korean, everything is Korean now. Perfect, right? Easy now. And so that's the thing. Maybe someone is going to tell you, but you know, this is organic raspberry. I told you. Okay, so you can just go here, right? On the table, and you can just change. I don't know how is this in French and Korean, but pretty much they're gonna change automatically for us, right? So imagine you going layer by layer, changing that, right? Horrible, right? If you're doing that, oh my God, horrible, right? I know some of you guys are doing that. Yes or no? Yes, right? Be honest. I know that. Okay. Okay, so you don't need to do that. Everything's going to be easy, simple, and even managing the instance of your components, right? You can change the flag. You can change a lot of stuff, which is crazy, right? So you don't need to do that manually, okay? So colors. Let's go to colors now, okay? So colors, we have a couple of them that I just added here, just to have something to use, right? So if you see here, I have all these color styles. If you don't know how to create color styles, talk to Anais and Kevin and then enroll for the bootcamp, right? Because I cannot teach everything in 2 hours, right? So it's gonna be there's a couple of steps to build that, but I just brought like here an example. But the problem is not a problem, is because you have to select if you prefer to work using color styles or if you prefer to use variables. Because if you have both, it's going to be pretty confusing to use both in the same design system. Another thing that is really weird from, and I understand because they are still in beta mode, is because if you want to use gradients, that is like a pretty popular using gradients, right, in design, you cannot use gradients in variants, which is very weird, right? It's weird because on CSS, right, in coding, the way that developers can save a gradient color already exists, you know, in coding. It's not something new. It's already there. They are already created, but Figma, they didn't create that. I don't know why, right? It's something that they should just add it, right? Like on this first version. But anyways, probably they will do that. So that's another problem that I'm facing when I'm talking with other people, because they cannot use variables for everything because they are using a lot of gradient colors, right? So they need to keep the gradient colors on the color styles. And some of them, they're like using both of them, variables and color styles, and some of them they're just waiting for Figma to update the variable concept. Okay, so let's say that you are working in a company and now they told you, hey, we need to move everything to variables because everybody's doing that. Okay, so you are not going to do one by one, right? So there's like developers, they created plugins to do that, right? So you can just convert styles to variables. The name of plugin is style to variables. The both of them, they are very creative, of course, because they want to make it easier for you to find the plugins. But pretty much styles to variables, the both plugins, they do the same thing. Okay, so I don't have any color right now here. If you can see, I don't have any collection that is color, but I will just run one of them, and it's running here. So they created 20 variables colors for me right now. So if I go here and color styles, I can see all the colors that they were before in color styles, right? Now they are living into variables. And you can save all of them in folders also, right? So if you use the backslash, pretty much you can just move the folders, the same concept that you have for the color styles, okay? So it's pretty easy, right? Like to do that. So the only problem is because of all the things that you have to organize if you are using the gradients, okay, on your project. So one thing that you could do now, right? Usually, you are not gonna give access for all the colors easy like that for everybody, right? Because the idea of using tokens is to be also a little bit more semantic when you're like working with colors, right? So instead of calling the background color as gray 400 or like a primary steel blue, you're gonna try to use like a background color, just that, simple like this, right? Or just background, or just like a text color, right? Things that is gonna be way easier to developers to understand, and also for you, right, to remember. And what exactly you're gonna do is like an alias of the original color, right? So that's what exactly you're gonna do. And to do that, one of the things that you can do is like a renaming the collection, and you can just pretty much you can just use like a dot or a underline, and this will hide the color palette for other designers, right? So if you just use a dot, pretty much this is going to be hidden, okay? So how exactly we're going to use that? And that's, of course, there's a lot of things that you can do from that change, right? Like why I'm changing to like a color styles to variables, because of course there's a lot of different things that you can accomplish using that is going to be closer to that. Okay, so this is like a duplicated. Okay, so let's see the button, right? This is a button, okay, that we have here, and that button is using like some colors like that, right? Random colors that I selected just to have. But we're gonna start using probably a new collection, right? Like, so what I can do is creating even like a simple collection. I will call that as button for now, the very simple collection. And the button itself, we have three colors. We have the background color, we have the border, right? And we have the text, okay? So what exactly I'm gonna do? I'm gonna create colors. So this is gonna be the text color, right? For the button. But instead of using that text color as a white here, I will use my library because I already have some of those color, right? So let's say I wanna use the gray 100, right? The neutral 100. For the text, I want to add another color that is going to be the background. So this background color maybe can be this English violet. And I can add the border, right? Border. And this will be, let me see, could be this one, okay? The Robin egg blue, okay, for now. Cool. So all the information that you have for different buttons, right? For now, I just have one. But if you want to have like primary, secondary buttons, whatever, you can just add different folders here, and you can manage all that, right? Okay, so I will change now, right? Because the background color now, I should be using the new like colors that I created for my button, right? So this is gonna be my background color, and this will be my border, right? And the text itself will be the, like here, let me just scroll up, text, right? So now everything that I change here in the future will be linked here. So let's say that I don't like that or is wrong. So you can just come here and change the color into the variables, right? So it's easier to manage, and it's going to be a little bit more semantic also, because developers, they use the same mindset to code, right? So that's why you are doing that, right? That's why Figma is bringing that closer and closer to a design tool, right? Because instead of like every time that you hand off, oh, this color is that color. Remember, like on the color palette is the color that, or you're gonna start duplicating a lot of colors on the color styles because of that, right? Oh, but I need to know the name of the color. So instead of doing that, you have your original color palette, but you can just link them for each one of them, right? For the colors that you need to use. Okay, so that's the concept behind that. Okay, so having this color, this button here, we're gonna do something really cool, because you can use like this button to have like a wireframe mode, light mode, and dark mode. Okay, so in one single button, I can have all those different like a design, right? And this is super useful, by the way, when you need like just to wireframe an idea, right? And you don't want to use all the colors, so you can just use like that to make a very simple grayscale like a design. Before that, I was using like a different ways to turn into grayscale, but nowadays it's pretty useful the way they create it. So and that's the use case that I'm going to show now. It's not only for that, but also if you have different teams, right? So let's say you work for Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola, they have different brands. You can create different teams for the button, right? Because if you're like looking for in a specific product, you can just change that. If you're using like a microsite for this promo, they are building a landing page, so automatically the colors are gonna change for you, right? And that's a big reason why they block the mode for only 4, because if you want to create more modes, you have to pay, right? If you click here, you have to pay. So I know, because a lot of companies, they are really starting using the power of variables to speed up the process of working, and of course there's a price on that, right? So I know that a lot of people complain about, oh, they are charging whatever because Adobe, but they need to pay, right? All the people that are working to build the tool. So what I'm gonna do now, I have my button here, and I will change that for all the modes that I want to build, right? So I have the wireframe mode here. Oops, wireframe. Here I have the light mode that I want to build, and I have my dark mode, right? So of course, for the wireframe, I just want to use grayscale. So the background, instead of being that, I will use like let's say 800, and the border, maybe I will use like 600. Okay. So the light mode, I can keep the same colors. For the dark mode, let's say, let's change just to have something different. Okay. Maybe it's not going to be the best design ever, but at least it's going to be something different. Okay, so we have 3 different colors, right, for the same component, right? So this is a huge thing. So what we are gonna do now, we're gonna tell the parent frame, right? For we have the frame, and remember that I was explaining that this is gonna use the like information from the parent. If you change in the middle, of course they're gonna change the colors. But if you're a very organized person, right, and you do your bed every morning, right, like me, right? Yes or no? No, you don't do your bed every morning? Okay, great. So it's going to be difficult variables for you. Okay, but I hope you are doing that. It's going to be good for you. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to change each one of the modes that we have to use the components that we are using here. Okay, so I will duplicate this button, and this is my wireframe mode, right? So if you come here, now they're gonna show me the options that I have available. So I want to set up as a wireframe, right? But if I duplicate here, it's showing me that this is a wireframe because they are using the first column, right? But if I use the light mode, they're changing for the light button, right? And this one, I want to change that for the dark mode, right? So maybe like this, we can change the color, okay? So you have a dark mode. So the cool thing about that is because you can have a lot of components, a lot of them. And if you need just to change that, you can just drag, right? Because it's already telling from the parent that everything under that frame should be light mode. Everything here is dark. So automatically it's going to change for you in the future. Okay. So I hope you're going to be a very organized person. Okay. So once you start doing the boot camp, right? The first 3 days, we just do like a folding clothes, like Marie Kondo, just to see if you're gonna be a person that is gonna handle that for the future. Okay, I'm joking, of course not. We never do that, but it's just to know if you are going to be a very organized person. Okay, I hope so, right? As I always mention, if you're not gonna be an organized person, don't use my name, okay? You never met me in your life, okay? So I hope you're gonna be a very organized person to do all that, okay? Cool. This is one use case, okay? Also to do that. Let's go to another thing. Breakpoints. It's boring or is it's too much content? Or it's like if it's boring, I can stop for you guys also. No? No, Ines wants to keep here, okay. And Carla also, okay, Carla. Anais, okay. All right, so let's keep going. So breakpoints, right? That's another big discussion all the time with developers because every time you talk and people are designing, my problem, personally, my problem is not even against developers, it's against designers because designers, they do random stuff. The problem of random stuff is organizing things to show that to developers in the future. And we don't wanna like create a mess, right? To do that. So breakpoints. So whenever you're using breakpoints, right, you're gonna use like all these like grids to use for like for design. What I like to do, I like to define that, right? And this is something that you're gonna define with your developers also, right? So I just brought some sizes here, medium, small, from Bootstrap. That is like a framework from Twitter that is X now, right? But it's good because they pretty much made this open source before turning to X, so now it's free, and they have like some like a breakpoints that is pretty popular on the web, so you can use that. They have extra large screens, but if you want to use extra large, you have to pay, right? So that's why they are so smart. So you're gonna use a couple of screens. So I use that as a minimal width. So that's another question, right? Like you're gonna talk with developers. Maybe they're gonna use max. Maybe they're gonna use resolution. There's many ways to do breakpoints, by the way. Okay, I'm just trying to make it very simple, but this is what we are gonna do, right? If you're like a small size, medium size, large size, or extra large. So what we are gonna do now is every time that you're gonna set up, you're going to come here and we're gonna set up the breakpoint, right? So let me just go here. So the breakpoint, this is the minimal width for the tablet, right? So that's what exactly I'm trying to hope to use for the future. And also, I like to use, for example, the viewport side, because sometimes people, designers, right, for desktop especially, oh, I designed this landing page and the hero section sometimes too small or too big. And even the hero section, people need to scroll. So sometimes it's good to have a viewport, like an average size, right? So 768, so at least we can come here and test and use the viewport, right? And this is what exactly people will see on their browser, okay? So having that information, every time that I'm working later in the future, right? Whatever you may need to do, like you can just set up if it's going to be a small breakpoint or like a large breakpoint. Oops, I think maybe this one is making a confusion because there's no information. There's the problem is like is zero, the information. So let me just remove that for now. But every time that you want to design, you just go here, how it's going to look like on a medium size or a small size or large size, right? So it's easy to change and check the design if the design is working, right? If you don't have the variables, what you are doing? Sometimes people come here and change here, or they change manually, right? But if you want to deliver something very organized that is following the breakpoints that they are using for coding, you're going to start using that, right? Because you want to make sure that this is using the correct breakpoint. Okay, cool. So that's another way to start organizing things on your project. So Boolean, that's a cool one. And this is how things are start going to change. The prototyping is going to be a little bit more complex for everybody. So that's why I see a lot of like designers struggling a little bit on that, which is fine. And they are still doing like a duplicating 50 times the same screen just to show an interaction, right? Because they need to start understanding the power of variables, right? So I hope you're like open to start like thinking about that. So I will play here quickly this one. So everything that you see here is connected to the variables. I did that. Okay, so if you wanna like later on, actually, oh, this one is not connected. I think I disconnected to show you. So what we have here, I have a couple of variables that I want to show you. So I have the cards. I have card 1, 2, 3, right? All of them, they are true because I want to show them. So the only thing is because each one of those cards, right? If I want to assign the value for them, is super weird, by the way. Super weird because you have to go to the layers. That's something very, very crazy, right? People always ask me about that because they never find the information. And you have to thank Figma because they didn't create the interface here. So if you want to use the Boolean value, you have to go to the layers, and there's a secret door to access that, which is crazy. What is the secret door? Is using the right click, right? So the right click is gonna open the variables, right? It's crazy. Nobody understand that. So I can use the card 1 here. The second one, I will link that to the card 2. And this one, I will link to the card 3. Okay, nothing is happening. I understand, but it's because everything is true. But now look that. If I just turn off, they're gonna be controlled by the variables. So imagine the power of doing drop downs, menus, or like whatever select input fields, right? That instead of doing like a lot of variants or whatever you need, you're going to start like using variants to control that, right? So now start the coding part, right? Little by little, that is going to make like this a little bit more complex through the time. So if I want to show all of them, I can just add an action here. Then on click, I will set the variable that is like related to the cards. I can just type card. Card 1 is going to be true, right? I can set another variable, right? Or pretty much I cannot duplicate, I think. Let me see if this is, no, this I cannot duplicate. So I have to set the variable card2 as true, right? And I have to set another variable that is the card3 to true, right? So Boolean values, as they're one of the type of variables for coding, okay? And here for height, I can just do the same thing. So if I want to set a variable for the card here, I want to do false now because I want to hide them, right? I have to do one by one, pretty tedious in the beginning, but once you understand the concept and you start like doing that, right? It's gonna change everything that you know about Figma probably. Okay, so now I will play this prototype. So what's gonna happen? If I click on hide, it's gonna hide all of them, right? Or show all of them. Because now, instead of like doing multiple screens to show that, right? You're gonna duplicate, make another frame that is hiding this component and you set the opacity to 0, whatever it is, right? No, you're gonna control everything using variables now, right? You just hide or show whatever you need, okay? So this is one use case. So now you're gonna see a lot of those things, right? From your nerdy designers, right? And you're gonna see, hey, what you're doing? I'm coding, right? I'm coding inside Figma now a little bit. This is very simple. So this one, you see, is gonna be hard for you now. A lot of developers, they're gonna help you maybe on that, but pretty much it's conditional. So there's another one that, let's say that you have to create a pin, like a screen, and imagine doing that randomly, right? So you can say whatever pin you want, like 5, 4, 5, 4, 8, 9, right? Okay, so it's all good. But let's say that you want to do another one that is 1, 2, 5, 7, right? All the time that you use that, they're gonna use exactly the value that the user are like typing on the keyboard, right? And in order to do that, there's a lot of conditionals that you have to add on each one of the buttons. And also, of course, you're gonna change the value on the input field here, and it's gonna change. And this is linked to a variable, right? That is the addition one that is gonna change the value for you. And it's using more than that, right? You're setting the value and you're changing the value to show and hide the layer that you want, right? It's almost combining a little bit of this and this together in one thing, right? So imagine you doing that screen, right? The password can be only 222 because it's the only way that I could do, right? And people will say, okay, so this is the old way, right? The new way you can do in multiple ways, and you can really make this very interactive to people, okay? Even to show the button, right? The button was hidden. So do you think this is hard? This is going to be fun, right? For the future. There's a lot of things that you can do. So there's other conditionals that I was like playing here. So for example, you can add to cart, right? A lot of things, but also let's say that you are adding too much. You can just show a message that is only 10 per user, right? And the user needs to remove, or you can have another button to add value for that. So imagine a shopping cart, right? You have a shopping cart and you can just use the shopping cart to add, change the values. Imagine the first screen that I was using the translation, that you have the items, you have the total, all the stuff. You can do all the math, right? Behind, and the prototype is only using one frame, right? You are not using multiple frames. You're using one frame to do all this logic behind, okay? So that's why this will reduce the number of the screens that you have on your prototype in the future, okay? So there's much more use case that you can use that, how you can use that, how you can link, how you can change. But I think this is gonna be too long, so I just finish here. Okay. So this is like the time that you can I can read some of the questions. But if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and mute yourself and ask your question. I will be happy to answer. There's two things that I don't answer. Some of people already know, right? Anais and Kevin, you guys know that I never answer those. Whistler, also, you're here. But that's everything that I have for you guys today.
Wow. Great job, Juno. No questions here.
Okay, so let me read some of those questions here. Mike, how do you set up the full radius that automatically applies to new cards you are creating? So every time that you create a new card, you have to link the first column, right? So the first column is gonna be set by default. So, but every time that you create a new card, you have to link the variable, right? So this is something that you have to do manually the first time, okay? So there's no automated way to do that for now, okay? Cool. So any other question, feel free to ask me or feel free to send me anything else that you wanna learn. I will leave here some of my contacts here, the newsletter link. If you wanna read the newsletter, feel free. Okay, if you wanna connect with me, also feel free to connect. But yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do using variables, and this is just a couple of examples, right? Like and that's I think another concept that is about local and global variables. That is the same thing. That is when you are coding, you have local variables and global variables. That is you can use across different files. But I think this is something that Figma will start working better because I was trying to figure it out a better way to set up that, but there's no really good way to set up that yet. Okay, so this is gonna get more complex through the time, I think. So it's important that you get familiar with the concept. Okay. Okay, so Inez, I know you always have questions. I don't know, I'm surprised that you don't have questions right now.
I do have, but they're too complicated that maybe it's not time for me to ask them. I'm kind of confused right now, so.
Okay. All right. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me the questions later on. Okay. Probably Inez is gonna send me a lot of questions, so feel free. Kevin, I don't know if you have anything that you want to share also.
Not necessarily, just obviously if you guys enjoyed this workshop and if you guys want to learn more and potentially take a UX UI class with Juno as your lead instructor, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll go ahead and drop my LinkedIn just in case. It's probably the easiest way, and you can reach out to me there. Please feel free to add me as a friend. But yeah, if you guys are interested at all in learning a little bit more about Ironhack, please feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. It was very good to see all of you guys here, and yeah, if you have any question or if you want to try different things in variables, let me know. I always like challenges to solve, problems to solve. I see Erica here. Hey, Erica, nice to see you, right? It's hard to see, but I'm happy that you joined the session. Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Juno, and thank you for everyone to taking the time and coming today. I hope you learned a little bit about Figma variables. And like Juno said, please feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any additional questions.
Okay. Okay.
All
Perfect.
righty. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thank you.